Good morning. The committee will come to order. I thank everyone for joining us this morning, and I want to especially thank the witnesses for being with us today. Our committee has a long-standing tradition of working in a bipartisan manner on behalf of America's 30 million small businesses. We work together to make the programs at SBA more effective and seek ways to encourage entrepreneurship and job growth on Main Street. And because small businesses are such an important part of our economy, what we do here impacts the lives of nearly every American. At a time when income and wealth inequality are at record levels, real wages for middle-class workers are nearly stagnant, retirement security is no longer guaranteed. One way to combat this problem is through the employee-owned business model. Employee-owned companies can take on many forms, but the central premise is that the interests of the employees and owners are aligned. As a business generates more revenue and profits, a direct connection is drawn between an employee's work and how much he or she is compensated, thereby creating a culture of ownership. This business model helps workers and communities raise the standard of living and quite literally feel more invested in the success of the enterprise. The best known kinds of employee ownership are the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, also known as an ESOP, and cooperatives. There are many benefits to employee ownership that can address some of the economic issues facing workers today. ESOPs report higher wages, better employee benefits, and stronger job security, especially during periods of economic distress. In addition to better wages and benefits, worker-owned firms are also known for reinvesting more in their local community than conventional businesses and for democratizing management and decision-making. Because the workers themselves make the company's strategic decisions, there is a little danger of a worker cooperative unexpectedly leaving town or being sold to outside investors. This ensures the economic vitality of local communities. In recent years, the option of converting a business to an employee-owned model has grown in popularity, though there are challenges in financing and completing such a conversion. For example, businesses seeking to transition to an employee-owned model frequently face difficulty in obtaining adequate capital to cover the costs, which are often prohibitive. That is why last Congress I led and helped pass the Main Street Employee Ownership Act, which sought to minimize those capital access barriers and encourage more SBA lending back loan to cooperatives and ESOPs. By easing some burdensome guarantee restriction, it was my hope that we could continue to make the employee-owned model more affordable for local businesses, creating opportunities for more entrepreneurs, while financially empowering employees with a stake in the workplace. The legislation was also intended to help billions of baby boomers who own private businesses and plan to retire create a succession plan that helps them cash out while keeping jobs and investment in the local community. However, we have heard from numerous employee-owned businesses and lenders that accessing the SBA lending programs has been nearly impossible because of current SBA policy. At today's hearing, we will hear about the good work that employee-owned businesses like the co-ops, who are booming in popularity all over my district in Brooklyn, are doing for their employee owners and local communities. We will also explore the negative impact of SBA's failure to follow congressional intent when implementing the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. We know there are still many challenges ahead as we seek to encourage greater employee ownership of business, challenges that are often unique to either co-ops or ESOPs. As we continue our work here in the Small Business Committee, we need to hear more about those challenges too. So I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel of witnesses today about the benefits of employee ownership of business, but also the challenges these unique businesses face in starting up and expanding. Again, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Chabot, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. In the life cycle of a business, many important and crucial decisions are made. Some of these decisions lead to brilliant success. Others could mean failure. One of the most significant decisions a business must make is how to structure its organization. From sole proprietorship to C corporations, there are a multitude of options available that could benefit both the company and the company's employees. Today, we will explore one structure that has assisted thousands of companies all across the country. The employee ownership model provides employees with an opportunity to own a stake in the company that they work for. One form of employee ownership is the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, or ESOP, as the chairwoman mentioned for short. A company that is organized as an ESOP provides its employees with the opportunity to obtain ownership shares through a qualified defined contribution plan. Research shows that ESOPs provide important retirement options for employees seeking to save for their retirement. This committee has a long history of examining employee ownership to determine both benefits and also some of the shortfalls. For example, Chairwoman Velasquez authored the Main Street Employee Ownership Act of 2018, which was designed to enhance the ability of the SBA, the Small Business Administration, to work with businesses interested in employee ownership. Ultimately, that legislation was favorably reported out of this committee and was signed into law as a part of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2019. Today, we add another chapter to this committee's long history of discussing employee ownership. In particular, I'm interested in hearing about what is working and what isn't working as businesses move through the employee ownership conversion process. Additionally, I'd like to hear about the economic benefits of employee ownership. My hope is that this hearing will shed more light on this very important business structure, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here and participating this morning. Look forward to all your testimonies, and Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. The gentleman yields back. And if committee members have an opening statement, we will ask that they are submitted for the record. I would like to explain the timing rules. The witness gets 5 minutes to testify, and members get 5 minutes for questioning. There is a lighting system to assist you. The green light comes on when you begin, and the yellow light means there is 1 minute remaining. The red light comes on when you are out of time, and we ask that you stay within the time frame for the best of your ability. I would now like to introduce our witnesses today. Our first witness is Mr. Daniel Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein is the CEO and president of Folians, a company that for over 130 years was primarily a family-owned print and broadcast media company. Their ESOP was started in 1986 and became 100% ESOP-owned in 2012. Today, 570 employee owners work in Folians media business, ambulance manufacturer, and high-end horse and livestock trailer manufacturer. We welcome Mr. Goldstein and Ms. Finkenauer. Would you like to add anything to my introduction of Mr. Goldstein? I yield to the Congresswoman.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for holding this hearing today. We are so excited to have you all here, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. Now, we obviously know employee ownership is good for business, it's good for people, and it's good for communities like the one I represent in Northeast Iowa. When employees have a stake in the company, these businesses have deep roots in the area where they are located. These businesses are more likely to stay local and invest in their communities. Employees are literally bought into the business, often increasing overall productivity and success. Employee-owned businesses can also offer strong wages and retirement security to people who work there. I'm lucky to have some excellent employee-owned businesses in my own district. VGM Group, a member service organization for post-acute care headquartered in Waterloo, was named Iowa's 2019 Best Large Employer by the Des Moines Register. Timberline, an electrical contract manufacturer in Marion, has brought innovation and growth to the area. Foliance in Cedar Rapids, once a family-owned print and broadcast media company, has become an employee-owned company of 570 workers. Today, I am pleased to introduce my constituent, Daniel Goldstein, President and CEO of Foliance, who helped transform the company. Since Daniel joined Foliance in 2016, he has helped diversify its revenue base through acquisitions. Today, Foliance owns media businesses, an ambulance manufacturer, a high-end horse and livestock trailer manufacturer, and more. Daniel brings 20 years of executive leadership to his current position. He's passionate advocate for employee ownership and is on the board of governors of the ESOP Association, the board of trustees of the Employer Ownership Foundation, and the board of the Employee Ownership Expansion Network. You are a very busy guy, Daniel, and it means a lot to me that you took all this time to come here to DC. We look forward from hearing your insights today. Welcome to DC, and thank you again for your leadership. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back. Our second witness is Mr. R.L. Condra. Mr. Condra is the Vice President of Advocacy and Government Programs for the National Cooperative Bank, a national financial institution dedicated to providing banking solutions for co-ops and their members. Mr. Condra also serves on the board for Cooperation Works, a national network of organizations focused on co-op development. Prior to joining the private sector, Mr. Condra served as professional staff on the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Forestry, and Nutrition for Chairwoman Blanche Lincoln. Welcome, Mr. Condra. Our third witness is Mr. John Abrams. Mr. Abrams is the founder, president, and CEO of South Mountain Company, a 45-year-old integrated architecture, engineering, building, and renewable energy company committed to triple bottom line business practices. Located on Martha's Vineyard, South Mountain has been a worker cooperative for 32 years, was one of the first beneficial corporations in Massachusetts, and is currently in transition to second-generation leadership. Mr. Abrams is also the author of the book, Companies We Keep, Employee Ownership and the Business of Community and Place, which was published in 2008. Welcome, Mr. Abrams. I would now like to yield to our ranking member, Mr. Shabbat, to introduce our final witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our final witness will be Mark Gilming, who's the Senior Vice President and Secretary of Messer Construction Company, which is headquartered in America's greatest city, Cincinnati, Ohio. Messer has multiple locations around the country, including in several members' districts or close to them. On this committee, Mr. Burchett's in Tennessee and Mr. Bishop's district in North Carolina. Messer Construction went through an ESOP conversion back in 1990 and is still prospering today. Mr. Gilming is a longtime employee of Messer Construction, having started his career there in 1985, 35 years ago, coincidentally, the same year that I was first elected to Cincinnati City Council. He currently runs all of Messer's Construction's professional development operations and has multiple degrees from the University of Cincinnati, including not one but two distinguished alumni awards. Mr. Gilming, we very much appreciate you being here today and all the other witnesses as well. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Goldstein, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez and Ranking Member Shabbat and members of the committee. I'm Daniel Goldstein, CEO of Foliance, a Cedar Rapids-based company in business since 1884 and 100% owned by our employees since 2012. I also represent the ESOP Association, a nonprofit whose purpose is to protect and grow employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs. 6.6% of the U.S. workforce has ownership in an ESOP. That's more than 10.6 million employees. ESOP employees outnumber the workforce of the entire U.S. auto industry by more than 500,000. We outnumber the combined workforce of federal and state government by 3 million. ESOPs contribute substantially to our economy, and we believe they hold a solution for many of the intractable issues facing our economy. As you know, one of the biggest challenges ahead is the looming retirement in the next 10 years of baby boomers who own 2.5 million small businesses. Known as the Silver Tsunami, it will be the largest transfer of business ownership in the shortest period of time in our nation's history. The businesses and their employees face difficult futures if supportive policies are not adopted. I've seen what can happen if a succession plan is not made and the role employee ownership can play in preventing catastrophe. Let me tell the story of a typical small town. Sumner, Iowa, population 2,000, has one major private employer. Lifeline Emergency Vehicles designs and builds ambulances. It provides 180 good-paying jobs. 10 years ago, the founder passed away, leaving control of Lifeline to a 69-year-old widow. When I met her, she was 75 and had no heirs prepared to take over the business. Most in this situation face three choices: sell to private equity, to a competitor, or close and sell off the parts. Foliance gave them another option: sell to their employees through an ESOP. Foliance's ESOP purchased Lifeline, and those 180 employees became owners of Lifeline and every other business in the Foliance portfolio. Despite the many well-known benefits of employee-owned businesses, those seeking to launch ESOPs face multiple unnecessary obstacles, and I'd like to focus on three. The first is an absence of clear federal regulatory guidance, particularly on business valuations. Second, a shortage of lending capital for ESOP formation or acquisitions. And third, education. There is low public and professional awareness about ESOPs. Today, I ask Congress to task federal agencies with solutions to all three. First, I submit the biggest obstacle to forming and expanding ESOPs is the chilling effect of the U.S. Department of Labor. DOL has perpetuated an absence of formal regulatory guidance while simultaneously pursuing a litigious approach to oversight. The effect has been a deep chill on the market. Every year, hundreds of business owners attend educational events the ESOP Association hosts to learn about ESOPs. And once exposed to the lack of clear guidance, many turn away out of fear that some unknowable misstep will invite never-ending DOL scrutiny. 45 years after ESOPs were established with the passage of ERISA, the Department of Labor has yet to finish its rulemaking process. They nearly finished in 1988, but they'd never issued regulations. But here's the travesty. It is impossible to prove how many American workers have lost the opportunity to become employee owners as a result of this chilling effect. A solution can start very simply. Congress should require DOL to define one thing: what constitutes adequate consideration when an ESOP trustee values the price to be paid for a company. This one simple piece of guidance could be a game changer for employee ownership. Second, to start addressing lending shortages, the SBA must streamline lending for the ESOPs as outlined in the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. Unfortunately, in implementing the legislation, the SBA excluded ESOP loans from the preferred lending program, instead continuing to require headquarter approval for all ESOP loans. We ask that the SBA be unambiguously directed to include ESOP loans in the preferred lending program. Third, the Main Street Act tasked the SBA with promoting awareness of ESOPs and employee ownership. The ESOP Association knows that some in the agency already take this task seriously, but they are too few and lack adequate support, structure, and resourcing. Business owners must know the ESOP option exists and be able to obtain useful, unbiased information. To that end, we ask that the SBA be directed to resource a specific office, such as the Office of Small Business Development Centers, with active public education and information efforts. These three actions will provide a clearer path to launching and expanding ESOPs. Thank you for the privilege of sharing the testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Conrad, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Shabbat, and members of the committee. I am honored to discuss the benefits and challenges of employee-owned businesses. Thank you for bringing this topic out to the light and providing a forum for discussion it so richly deserves. Today, I will discuss how a prohibitive policy requirement by the Small Business Administration is hindering the growth of the cooperative business sector. If this issue is resolved, lending institutions like the one I work for will be able to make loans that will help to grow small businesses, create quality jobs at increased wages, and provide healthy food and grocery options for communities throughout the country. My employer, the National Cooperative Bank, is a national commercial bank headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. With $2.8 billion in total assets, NCB delivers banking and financial services throughout the nation to cooperative organizations, complemented by a focus on economic development and low-income communities. A cooperative is a business that is organized, owned, and governed by the people who use its products or services. Those people are called member owners, and they own the business. They have a voice in its operations through a board of directors that members elect, and the profits from the cooperative flow back to the member owners. Employee-owned cooperatives, also known as worker cooperatives, give employees an ownership stake in the company in which they work. Cooperatives have evolved since the 1960s when the SBA recognized them as buying clubs. There are now over 40,000 cooperatives in the U.S., and the top 100 generated $222 billion in annual revenue in 2018. Some notable cooperatives include REI, Ace Hardware, Ocean Spray, Land O'Lakes, and Congressional Federal Credit Union. Since the Great Recession, worker cooperative numbers have doubled and have become a business option for young people, women, and minorities. According to the 2019 Worker Cooperative Economic Census, 50% of owners in worker co-ops are Latino and African American, and 62% of women make up the majority of the workforce. Municipalities have also recognized that co-ops are a viable business option and have taken steps to promote the growth and development of worker cooperatives in cities such as New York, Philadelphia, Madison, Minneapolis, and Austin. Over the past 40 years, my bank, NCB, has provided loans of more than $2 billion to cooperative businesses and independent retailers, including over $77 million to consumer-owned food co-ops. Per our loan policies and guidelines, NCB does not require a personal guarantee for consumer and worker-owned co-op loans due to the unique structure of our cooperative borrowers. In contrast, the SBA requires a personal guarantee from anyone who owns 20% or more of a business and will not guarantee a loan under the program if there is no such individual. This agency requirement makes it impossible for cooperative businesses to access the agency's lending programs. For decades, the co-op sector has asked the SBA to level the playing field for cooperatives to no avail from the agency. In 2018, Congress passed the Main Street Employee Ownership Act that directed the SBA to recommend and implement practical alternatives for cooperatives that will satisfy the agency's loan guarantee requirements. We were greatly disappointed to learn the SBA did not provide practical alternatives as the law required. Instead, the agency relied on its existing requirements that continue to block cooperative businesses from much-needed access to capital. Further, SBA's recommendation regarding an existing business to be sold and converted to an employee-owned cooperative would create new barriers. The agency recommends that a selling business owner provide a full, unlimited personal guarantee for the life of the loan. Imagine a small business owner selling their business to a buyer, but also having to put up their home as a guarantee for the buyer's own loan until it is paid off. The SBA's guarantee requirement is also contrary to industry practice for cooperatives. As mentioned, my bank does not require a personal guarantee, and CDFIs that specialize in co-op lending do not require one. The Department of Agriculture's Business and Industry Loan Program does not require a personal guarantee for loans to cooperatives. In addition, the SBA has shown flexibility with respect to the guarantee in similar situations in the past. Thus, the SBA does not require a personal guarantee when a loan is made to an ESOP business. The SBA has stated that cooperatives can satisfy the requirement by providing an entity guarantee to be the guarantor of the loan. We were recently approved by SBA using an entity guarantee for a food cooperative loan in Fredericksburg, Virginia. To my knowledge, this will be the first food cooperative loan in the history of the agency. While we are excited that SBA approved this loan, we have strong concerns that the entity guarantee is not a long-term solution for cooperative business for the following reasons. SBA is not prepared for an entity guarantee submission with this application process. The borrower adds more debt to the loan that is needed. The lender adds more risk to the loan than is needed, and only wealthy communities with the ability to raise cash will be able to use this process. I am here today to discuss how the SBA's taxpayer-funded loan programs should be fair and available to everyone, including cooperative businesses. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Abrams, you're now recognized.
Ms. Velasquez, Mr. Cabot, members, thank you so much for having us. It's an honor. South Mountain, the company I founded nearly a half century ago, is an integrated architecture, engineering, building, and solar company. We do all the parts from beginning to end. For 33 years, it's been a worker co-op. Nearly 2/3 of the 37 employees share ownership today. We balance the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Quality, performance, and mission are all more important to us than growth. The company's built on humble beginnings. I had an older friend and mentor who followed our work in the early days. One day we were showing him a house in progress, and he said, "It's beautiful work, it's artful." And then he said, "Are you making any money?" "No," I chuckled, "we seem to lose money on every project we do." And he said, "Well, Abrams, you have a unique idea here, subsidized housing for the rich." And that bombshell inspired me to learn about business, what it is, the impact it can have, how to make fair profits, and that pursuit has become a passion. Now we make subsidized housing for those who need it. We devote ourselves to service, to each other, to the communities we work in, to strengthening our local economy. In 1987, 2 long-term employees told me they preferred to spend their careers at South Mountain rather than going off on their own, but they needed more of a stake than an hourly wage. Not long after, I agreed to restructure as a worker co-op to make a system that would welcome them and other committed employees over time to ownership. To be honest, at the time, I thought this was more symbolic than substantive. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Worker ownership has been far more meaningful and valuable than I ever imagined. There's no question in my mind it's been a critical factor in our modest long-term success. I believe that owning our work is as essential to a good life as owning our homes. Former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers once remarked, "In the history of the world, no one has ever washed a rented car." Ownership is powerful. When employee owners are making the decisions, it's more likely that companies will stay rooted in place and be positive forces in the community. Economist Richard Wolff says, "If our workplaces had been democratized long ago, would the workers have stopped raising their own wages? Hardly. Would they have destroyed their own jobs by moving production overseas? Doubt it. Would they have employed technologies that pollute the local environment? No, they live here. Would they have allowed some to earn astronomical salaries while the rest got no raises? No way. Our economic history over the last 30 years would have been radically improved if we'd had a different way of organizing our enterprises, with a more cooperative, community-focused method that's democratic at its core. Growing the worker cooperative approach has the potential to positively affect the economy, our democracy, the quality of working people's lives, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that the benefits of the democratic workplace may even aid and influence the essential repair of our battered civic landscape. It could change and affect the chemistry of our culture. If you spend your days working in an environment of collaboration, mutual respect, and shared power, it's bound to spill over into other parts of your life. Better parenting, kinder relationships, more civic engagement. Today, we are among the highest scoring of the 3,000 plus certified B Corps. Among them are socially responsible icons like Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Seventh Generation, and we annually make the B Lab Best for the World list. During the past 7 years, 6 first-generation employee owners have retired who collectively represent 180 years of employment. 6 people, 180 years. That kind of stability is rare in business today. We are deeply engaged in transitioning to our next iteration as a new group of owners takes the reins. I'm grateful that we will only have to change leadership, having dealt with the ownership part many years ago. We often assist companies transitioning to employee ownership. It's not uncomplicated, and all companies making this move need technical and legal assistance. The need is great. The Main Street Employee Ownership Act of 2018 was a big step forward, but there's far more to do. The value and benefits of employee ownership continue to fly under the radar, and you can't take this important step without knowing the option exists and understanding what it means. So perhaps the greatest need is extensive education and publicity. The stories of employee ownership successes need to be shared and celebrated. Employee ownership ambassadors should be funded to visit companies considering transitions, to teach, to train, to advise, to inspire. Widespread technical assistance should be made available. Employee ownership should be the #1 business succession planning option, but it's not. I hope this committee will continue to build on the great work that it has done so far, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to make this request and be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abrams. Mr. Gilman, you're now recognized.
Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Shabbat, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today to share my story as our retired CEO phrased it, inclusive capitalism, and the impact it has had upon hundreds of my fellow employees at Messer Construction. Thank you for holding this hearing to learn more about ESOPs and the legislation that can encourage more small businesses to become employee-owned. My name is Mark Gilming. When I began working at Messer Construction, it was a Cincinnati-based, medium-sized, family-owned construction company with a long history and a good reputation. But like most companies in construction, it had little in the way of employee benefits. By 1990, company-funded retirement benefits totaled only $1.5 million on behalf of about 99 participants. In 1988, the last son of the company founder died, and we found ourselves with an uncertain future. The grandchildren of the founder wanted to access their wealth, and having no connection with the employees, were not committed to maintaining employment at the company. In 1990, the Messer employees were able to buy their future from the Messer family using the ESOP structure. I was one of the employees that participated in that purchase, and we could not have purchased the company if not for the important tax advantages that the ESOP model afforded us. Our country's investment in ESOPs allowed 99 Messer employees to purchase their future, and the engagement that opportunity created has resulted in growth. Today, operating from 10 regional offices, Messer performs more than $1 billion in construction annually. And here is the measure of how that change our ESOP brought to our retirement savings. Messer now provides quality jobs and predictable retirement for over 1,200 individuals and has company-funded retirement assets for those employees totaling more than $400 million. Through our engagement with the employee-owned S Corporations of America, we have come to know of hundreds of companies with stories similar to ours, and the data from ESCA's quality research shows that ESOP companies are more robust, more sustainable, and provide higher levels of diversified retirement benefits than non-ESOP companies. The Messer ESOP is in place and working well for us. However, Messer manages a vendor supply chain of small local subcontractors who are increasingly at risk from forces both external and internal. For that reason, Messer supports ESCA's work to promote bipartisan legislation, H.R. 2258, that would encourage more employee ownership by providing incentives to S Corporation business owners to sell to an ESOP when they are looking to transition out of the business. This will allow more American workers to build meaningful retirement savings that those of us at Messer have realized through employee ownership. It was more than 20 years ago that Congress passed legislation creating S-ESOPs, and in addition to what I have shared with you about Messer, data shared by ESCA continues to show that S-ESOPs are a remarkable success story for young workers to retirees. Just a few highlights from recent surveys that committee members will find of interest. Close to 90% of ESOP retirees said their savings and ESOP benefits are enough to meet their retirement needs. Less than half of non-ESOP retirees said the same. 56% of millennial workers at ESOP companies said they had at least 6 months' salary saved for retirement, while 66% of their non-ESOP counterparts said they had no savings at all. The opportunity to become an employee owner has helped Messer Construction recruit and retain millennial workers in a tight labor market. These individuals share the vision of working as an owner and not just an employee, and embrace the challenges and opportunities that come with being an employee owner. Messer is a clear example of the power of inclusive capitalism that results from supporting S-ESOPs. I invite you to visit us or an employee-owned company in your district or state so you can see firsthand the pride employee owners take in their work and the confidence that employee owners have in their future. Ms. Chairwoman and committee members, I thank you for this opportunity to address the committee and share Messer's story, and for your consideration of legislation that will allow more hardworking Americans to share in the American dream at work.
Thank you, Mr. Gilman, and thank you all for the insightful information and stories that you have shared with us. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Goldstein, the Main Street Employee Ownership Act now allows the 7(a) preferred lenders to process ESOP loans under the delegated authority, streamlining the process for small firms. Unfortunately, the proposed rule implementing the law says those loans cannot be processed under delegated authority. What is the impact to the ESOP community with SBA taking this position and contradicting the clear language of the statute?
Thank you. Well, Folians has not utilized the SBA 7(a) loans, and I probably wouldn't, given the delay and how long it takes to get them approved. I can speak to the importance of timing in completing ESOP deals. There are two principles that I've learned from my experience. The first is that time is the enemy of all deals, and the second is that accessing capital is the greatest bottleneck in timing. So when Folians acquired Cimarron Trailers in 2018, we had a 12-day delay due to a financing issue, and just 12 days called into question changes in inventory, work in progress, working capital, finished goods delivered, and a variety of other criteria that meant that the adequate consideration, the fair price of the deal had to be recalculated. And as you look at moving the local approval of SBA loans to preferred lending providers who have local knowledge of the companies, they will have more direct knowledge to make more timely decisions, which will get more funding to create more ESOPs.
Thank you. Mr. Condra, how many businesses that you work with have been good candidates for the 7(a) loan program but could not get one because of the personal guarantee requirement?
Thank you for that question. And some of my answers today will refer to food cooperatives like Park Slope in your district
Yes.
in Brooklyn, because the food co-ops and worker co-ops are in the same boat with SBA, and food co-ops are a more mature sector at this point. But we get multiple inquiries every month from cooperatives. There is a nonprofit called the Food Cooperative Initiative that provides technical assistance to startup food co-ops. There's currently 125 in different phases. And then employee-owned in the worker co-op sector, 25 new worker co-ops are created every year. And all that being said, we don't know what the need is, the total need out there is, because it's common knowledge among the industry that you can't access the SBA programs. And I will also, additionally, a letter was sent to you in December from the village of Williamsburg outside of Buffalo, New York. They were counting on SBA for this alternate requirement for the guarantee, and they sent you a letter saying that now they're hindered from moving forward because there's not an option for them.
So I know that in the USDA Business and Industry Loan Program, they offer a waiver from the personal guarantee requirement for co-ops, and that is a $25 million max loan program. So do you think a waiver provision like the one the USDA has would work at SBA?
I think it's a good option. I need to get more knowledge about that waiver process to learn more, but that's just another example of thinking outside the box of how SBA could do this, along with the other alternatives that the sector has recommended, and they've said no to all of that. And I just want to remind you as well that SBA met with their counterparts at USDA to talk about alternatives, and USDA recommended a number of those, and the agency said no to those as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Abrams, well, I'm going to have the new administrator that was recently confirmed is coming before this committee at the end of February. Rest assured that we're going to ask
Thank you.
a question about this. Mr. Abrams, I know that in a co-op, Employee owners have a seat at the table when important business decisions are being made. Can you tell us how this process enhances employee morale and drives strong wages and benefits for employee owners?
I think it's at the heart of,
Do you have your mic on? Is it on?
I believe so.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. I really think it's at the heart of what makes these businesses successful, that the employees know that they have a seat at the table, that they know that their voice is heard loud and clear, and that in the end, they're going to make the decisions about policy. And I think when the people who are making the decisions bear the burden of the consequences of those decisions, but also benefit from the rewards of those decisions, we just get better decisions.
Thank you. My time is up. So now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gilling, I'll go with you first. Your company was being sold or transitioning from the family that owned it, and 99 employees purchased it, and obviously it's gone very well. What are the couple advantages, benefits, would you say, and versus are there any downsides?
I don't see any downsides.
The mic.
Apologize. Okay, I do not see any downsides. It's been a great experience for us. But what it's meant is we became employee owners, and there were 99 of us when we started out. We were all in this.
Was there any
together.
magic in that number at the time or anything?
No, it just
It just
what
seems
was.
like such an interesting number, 99, not 100, not 98.
It's
but
just where we
99.
were.
Yeah.
But, you know, what it's meant is that it changed some of, you know, we had a great culture to begin with, but it made it even better. Because I no longer was worried about, well, I want to succeed, so I want to see one of my coworkers not do so well. I'm interested in seeing them succeed because a rising tide raises all boats. And the culture just got better, and it becomes cohesive. And when you're an employee owner and making decisions as an employee owner, you know, those small decisions become big decisions, and you're making them. How we treat our owners, how we treat our subcontractors is so important.
I remember at a previous hearing, we had one of the witnesses that talked about that they'd gone to an ESOP, and it may have even been Messer, I'm not sure, but they talked about things like some employees in the past may have, you know, walked off with tools or office supplies or things like that. Other employees, hey, that's my stuff you're doing, and they would, amongst themselves, stop bad things from happening. Is that?
A good observation, because we had two mid-year career hires that came in. And about 6 months after they'd been there, they were talking. They said, you know what's different? They turn the lights out when they leave the conference room.
Excellent. Excellent. Mr. Abrams, I'll go to you next. In your testimony, you mentioned that your decision to restructure as a worker cooperative was really critical in South Mountain Company's success. How did it contribute to the success of your company in particular?
Well, for one thing, I think the origin.
I think the mic, I'm not sure if the mic's on there either.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
The origin of that decision was it was inspired by employees coming and saying, this is where we want to be, but the usual path is to achieve some level of competence and then go out and start businesses on your own. The fact that they wanted to be there meant that we needed to have a structure that would keep them there. And that was repeated time after time. So, first of all, I see a level of dedication that I don't see in other businesses, and this fact that people want to make their careers there and stay till the end, till retirement.
Thank you very much. Mr. Condor, could you walk us through with what a small business would experience if they approached your office to inquire about becoming employee-owned ESOP?
Let's give an example that a landscaping worker co-op, if it was in a certain state, we would immediately direct them to a cooperative development center, and that center would provide the technical assistance and the needs for how they do that. Mm-hmm. That co-op would then, if they were moving forward, create a planning committee. They would create a business plan. They would form a board, and they would go through the steps just like any other business would. And then at the end of the day, they would provide an application to our bank. One thing to note on that is USDA provides technical assistance grants to these development centers in rural areas. So if you're in rural Ohio, you can go to a development center and get some assistance. If you're in Cincinnati wanting to form a worker co-op, there's not any federal technical assistance to provide that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Goldstein, before I run out of time here, in your written testimony, you had described a chilling effect caused by a, quote, policy of regulation by litigation by the Department of Labor. Could you tell us in a little more detail what small businesses are going through with the Department of Labor with respect to what you were talking about?
Yes, absolutely. The most important element in an ESOP formation or acquisition is price. And adequate consideration is the process by which the trustee determines the fair price to be paid for that transaction. The trustee is representing the buyers being the employees. For over 45 years, the DOL has refused to define what this process is. And over the last 10 years, there's been aggressive litigation, which has scrutinized and challenged ESOP valuations. The chilling effect is that because there is no clear guideline on this, and there's the fear of litigation, that there are a lot of transactions that otherwise would not happen. There is evidence that you can see with the SEC of issuing robust guidelines for public companies that are being bought by other public companies or by private companies, and the process is evaluated by the SEC. A letter of no action is given if that process is determined to have been followed. So all we're asking is that the DOL issue guidelines that adequately define this process, the adequate consideration.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the witnesses, and my time's expired, Madam Chair.
The gentleman's time has expired, and now we recognize the chairman of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Infrastructure from Maine, Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Goldstein, just I think following up on that a little bit, could you try and walk the committee through how an ESOP trustee might currently determine the value of ESOP stock?
Sure, absolutely. The ESOP trustee uses a valuation firm. They may look at other comparables with small private companies. There's not a good amount of information, so they may have to extrapolate from the information from public companies. They may have to look at what is the best next comparable that is available from transactions that are known, but that's not from all transactions. There's no checklist of items to examine. There's no suggested metrics to use. There's no system of comparison. The DOL has used litigation, which some say has set precedent, but that precedent can be very individual to the actual transaction. So the metrics used for acquiring a manufacturing company will be very different than those used acquiring a technology or service company.
Yep, thank you. Do you have a preference or some input about how you think the Department of Labor should define the term adequate consideration in this context?
Yes, again, if they were to give clear guidelines that unequivocally can be followed by a trustee to ensure that a process is going to be followed, it eliminates that fear that once a transaction has been done, it will be under scrutiny that can be costly and take a lot of time and could be undone years later. And that is really what is causing a lot of ESOP transactions to not happen. The employees of the companies that don't become employee-owned are the ones that lose, because the business owners will find another seller, they'll buyer, they'll find private equity or strategic. It's those employees that are losing because there's not a adequate consideration regulation that's clearly identified.
Yep. So you just want clarity and consistency. Mr. Abrams, because you assist companies that transition to employee ownership, I know you know a lot about some of the technical and legal assistance that's necessary in the process, and wanted to ask what more might be done to help promote companies transitioning to employee ownership. What kind of assistance do people generally need to pull this off successfully?
Well, I think first people need to know that this option exists. Sorry again. That kind of publicity would be welcome and could be effective. In terms of technical assistance for making the conversion, there are the most important thing is that people know that there are companies and consultants that are doing this work. There are accountants that are well-versed in co-ops, and others, mostly they're not. So to know who to go to, what attorneys to go to, all of this information is important. But I think even more important at the beginning, for employees often feel like this is an owner leaving, and they need to understand that it can be inclusive and the owner can stay and work with them through the transition.
Thank you. Just going back to Mr. Goldstein, you mentioned in your testimony that you thought small business development centers might be a good place to, focal point for educating people about this particular option and maybe helping people through the transition. I can't remember if it was you specifically or someone else who also mentioned about small business development centers, that some regions are doing this kind of work, others are not. I wasn't sure if that was anecdotal or if you had anyone had any feedback about that.
Yes, what I've seen is that it is anecdotal, that there are different regions of the country that may have a more proactive approach to giving information about employee ownership. And what's most important is that any business owner that's looking at this transition in the silver tsunami, the 2.5 million small businesses that need to change ownership in the next decade or two, that they have access to that information unbiased, that they're not going to be misled by professional service providers that are going to steer them away from that. They need to see that that's an option which is going to keep companies and jobs and communities.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Innovation and Workforce Development, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, panel, and I thank you all very much also for taking the time to be here today. Throughout this hearing, we've heard numerous times about the benefits that exist in employee-owned businesses. Some of these benefits include higher wages, better working conditions, and more flexible working hours. However, one aspect that is vital to employees and employers alike is health care. Would you all please elaborate, and you can start with Mr. Goldstein and just go down the line there on some of the challenges of this healthcare space, and are the associated health plans part of the solution?
Certainly. ESOPs do address income inequality through competitive pay and benefits, and we offer both to our employees. Certainly, increasing costs can be a challenge to any business. I would like to stress that the other benefit is the retirement accumulation, which ESOPs address, which is wealth inequality. And it's important to point out that the difference between income inequality and wealth inequality is that income inequality will get the employee and their family through the next pay period. Wealth inequality, if you address that, gets the employee and their family through a funded retirement. So it's very important that they have the benefits which we offer, and also that they're accumulating these retirement benefits.
Okay. If you all could just be more specific on the healthcare piece of it. I'm trying to dial in on this associated healthcare plans and some of the tools that are out there that, whether it's the HSAs, the health savings accounts.
Yes, so we do offer the high deductible plans with HSA. Of course, it's important to educate employees so that they're contributing to the HSA as they take those high deductible plans. We use wellness programming to improve the wellness of the employees, so that's proactive and not just reactive. We do lots of wellness challenges. That's an important part of taking care of our employee population.
So I'm discussing worker cooperatives, which are separate from the ESOPs. Examples for worker co-ops, in my mind, are construction, retail, custodial, hourly daycare, hourly paid wages, and for the smaller ones. So it would be up to the co-op if they were able to bring in their own insurance or that nature. There are larger worker cooperatives such as Equal Exchange and Home Care Associations that have over 1,700 owners, which they would have their own health care plans.
Okay, thank you.
Our employee owners feel that health insurance is absolutely essential for them and their families, so we provide 100% coverage of everything imaginable, all deductibles paid, it's a high priority. Meanwhile, the Amicus Co-op, which is a purchasing co-op of 50 solar companies nationwide, is working to bring insurance to lower those costs because most of their members are worker-owned, and they're looking for ways to provide these benefits at lower cost.
Thank you.
We provide health care benefits for our employees as well. The employees pay a portion of it, the company pays a portion of it, but because we're employee owners, there's realization that this falls right to the bottom line, and expenses are important. So we have the benefit programs, the wellness programs, trying to reduce it. And I am one of the healthcare trustees for our company, so I am aware of what we do every year of going back out to the market to see what we can do to provide the best health care for our employee owners that we can at the best pricing.
Okay.
And so, going to the high deductible plan was one of those ways to help provide that as well.
All right. Thank you all very much. Madam Chair, I will yield back my remaining time. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, panel. And Mr. Gilming particularly, I represent Charlotte, which is, or part of Charlotte, which is one of Messer's expansion markets. And I'm curious whether ESOP ownership impacted your decision-making concerning expanding to markets like Charlotte.
It absolutely has. As we continue to grow, we're not growing because we want to do more work. We're growing to provide additional opportunities for individuals within Messer to continue to grow. It doesn't have to be a narrow pyramid where I have to retire for someone to take my place. I was asked in 2002 to move to Louisville to run the Louisville region. When I left the Cincinnati region, someone had to take my place. In 2010, I was promoted again to cover multiple regions. Someone had to take my place. So we do it for the growth of our employees. And we look for very active, vibrant communities because our people become part of the community. So that's obviously one of the reasons we're in Charlotte.
Well, I'm grateful for that, and I congratulate Messer on your success, all your employees. Picking up on Mr. Balderson's point, earlier in this Congress, I introduced H.R. 5224, the Increasing Health Coverage Through HRAs Act, and that legislation would codify, that is, give permanent effect in statutory law to the new IRS, DOL, HHS rule that allows employees to use health reimbursement arrangements funded by employers to purchase individual market coverage, and correspondingly allows employers to fund those accounts and deduct the amounts as pay, but it doesn't increase taxable pay to the employees, and then employees can obtain and maintain their own coverage that way. Early estimates are that this option will increase by 800,000 the number of Americans with health insurance coverage. And so my first question for the entire panel is, do you think the availability of new benefits flexibility like that puts smaller companies, especially employee-owned forms of businesses, in a better position to compete for top talent? Anybody who wishes to volunteer for that?
And as was previously said, we do go out to the marketplace every year and look at what are the available options, pricing, looking at ensuring that we don't disadvantage any one population as we have different companies that we bring together. And so absolutely increasing the options is always advantageous as we look at how to best provide benefits at the most cost-effective method to our employees.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. And now we recognize Mr. Spano from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it very much. As many of my colleagues know, I personally familiar with many of the challenges that small business owners face. Before coming to Congress, I owned my own small business for 13 years. In the entire time that I owned that business, I used an employee-owned model. I found that by giving employees stake in the business, that not only allowed them to feel more invested in the business, but it motivated them to succeed. It had skin in the game, so to speak. But also gave them a taste of what it was like to be entrepreneurs. One of the most daunting aspects of small business ownership is getting started. You see so many businesses fail. And I think entrepreneurs take enormous risk in their business, and often with little experience when they first start. So the employee-owned model can correct this problem, in my opinion, because it allows people to develop the skills of business ownership with substantially less risk, essentially, than maybe making a go of it, on their own. I think it better equips these folks to start businesses with that knowledge. But some of the most rewarding moments in my experience as a business owner is to see some of the folks that have been owners in my business then step out and start their own business. I've enjoyed that on several occasions. But so I strongly believe that employee-centered model can really make for better businesses and more productive employees. One theme that I have been noticing was that because employees are directly involved in ownership decisions of the business, the organizations tend to make decisions that benefit the employees, which makes sense. The question I have, however, does this impair a business potentially from making tough decisions sometimes that may be necessary for the health and growth of the business? For instance, if you have a market that's dynamic and changing rapidly and there need to be quick changes, potentially downsizing and so forth, how do you get to the point where you get employees who are, by nature, self-interested to come together and make a decision? And I'll just open the floor to anybody who wants to answer that.
In 2008, in response to the financial crisis, we set out 6 layers of actions, and the last on the list was actual layoffs. We never got there, fortunately. But I'll never forget when we did get to the point where we decided that we would have a 20% across-the-board reduction in pay. And at the end of that company meeting, a number of people came up to me and thanked me. And I said, wait a sec, your pay just got reduced by 20%. And they said, so did yours, and you lost more than I did. And they were just in it together. So that's a pretty tough business decision to make, and everybody was on board.
Anybody else like to offer an answer to that question?
I can't speak to the start of our business because that was in 1884. However, I can tell you that in 2016, when I was brought in, it was with the realization that while we had a 130-year-old profitable newspaper that was still independent, if we're going to be around for the next 130 years, we had better diversify our revenue base. And that's why we went through building an employee-owned platform that brings transition of other private companies into our company. And today we're 570 employees, 2/3 in manufacturing, 1/3 in media. And there are plenty of difficult decisions and allocation of resources, capital, staffing that go along the way in building that.
I would say on the worker co-op front, we've seen this since the Great Recession, is that young people are wanting to start their own businesses. They don't want to work for a corporation. Some don't want to work for a corporation. They want to own their own business, and they're happy to share that. Especially with conversions, the worker co-op model is not for everyone. Some people want to go to work 8 hours and go home. They don't want the responsibility of making the decisions or the stress and the pressure. But some people, it's a natural for them, and those are the ones that prosper.
The only thing I would add is, when the recession hit, obviously hit construction really hard. We did the same thing. We all came together, and we knew we were in it together. But the other thing within our company, it's a realization that good ideas come from people. They don't come from titles. So a lot of what we do and continue to advance ways to build buildings for our owners and deliver them quality projects at quicker schedules come from the ideas, and it may be somebody that just started with us last year.
Thank you. Yield back, Chair.
It's fine. The gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett, for 5 minutes.
Chair Lady, I hope I didn't cut in front of one of the other members down there. Did I do that? No, we're good? Okay, great. I don't want that to be reflected in anything I do, and it's bipartisan. That might hurt me in the reelection bid, so I just want to clear the air with that. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Madam Chair, always being courteous to me. And Mr. Gilming, is that how you say your name? Yes. Okay, Messer Construction, of course, has a big operation there in Knoxville in my area, and they do quality work, and thank you for being here, brother. And as an employee-owned company, what do you think the biggest challenge is that faces Messer Construction?
The biggest challenge that we face is that Congress will change the laws that they created in 1998 that allowed for SESOPs, because that allows us to continue to build towards our retirement and all of us working together and knowing that when we get up every morning and go to work, we're working for ourselves and we're building for the future for not only us, but for our families.
Yeah, I'm kind of a gearhead, and I visited a place called Jasper Motors, and they have a little operation there in Knoxville. I was at a radio station, and I said, I'm going to go down and check those boys out. And sure enough, they were one of y'all, an ASOP or how do you say it, ASOP?
ESOP.
Anyway, they educated me pretty quick on that. It's always good to talk to folks that actually work for a living, and not that we up here don't do any work, but reality is we don't. And you said Messer's supply chain of local contractors earlier. You said that they were facing some numerous challenges. Do you think that these subcontractors and subcontractors across the country could benefit from an employee ownership model? And what do you think that would look like?
Well, I absolutely do, and we are seeing that happening. There is a firm in Cincinnati, a long-time HVAC mechanical contracting firm that has just gone through the transition, Peck, Hannaford, and Briggs. And, it's time for the third generation now to move out, but what happens then to the employees? So they had the foresight to say, there's a structure here, and our retired CEO helped consult with them about some of the ways to help do that and the options that are there. But it allowed that company now to continue on and for all of their employees to still have employment.
Very good. And I want to give the rest of y'all some face time, because I realize your wives and or sons and daughters are watching y'all right now. So what do you see Congress can do to further help support employee ownership? We can just go down the line, and I've got 2 minutes and 23 seconds, so y'all divide it up amongst yourselves.
I'll be quick. Thank you, first of all, for pointing out that this is bipartisan, and so hopefully these changes can be made. I will go back to if this committee could bring up the issue of adequate consideration, the greatest challenge facing the formation of new ESOPs and acquisition of private companies to transition them to employee ownership, which is what Foliance is doing, is this issue of not having a clear definition of adequate consideration. So if you could bring that to the Department of Labor, please.
I believe you just did, but we will. Thank you.
Congressman, my answer, and it would be to this committee, is access to capital. If a group wants to start a worker co-op in rural Tennessee, they go to their local bank, the bank sends it to USDA and gets a loan guarantee, and they're off to the races. If that same group wants to start a worker co-op in Knoxville, they go to their local bank, same thing, everything. SBA denies that application due to the personal guarantee requirement. So it's access to capital at this point.
All right.
My answer would be that very few business owners know that a worker co-op is a viable entity of choice. More people need to know.
Let me go back real quick. Guy in the middle right here. I'm sorry, I don't have time to look at the names here. With the banks, do you think the banks want to do that business? Or do you think they're coming up here and doing the old sidestep and saying, oh, don't allow them to do that, brother. Oh, we can't do it. That's those bureaucrats in Washington.
No, it's the cooperate. There's not a process at SBA to provide a cooperative loan. The banks want to do this. I mean, this is what we specialize in, is cooperative loans, and it's just not us. It's other national lenders.
Hey, and thank y'all so much. Chair Lady, as always, this is a very bipartisan committee, and actually it's one of the few committees where I think something's actually getting done up here.
Thank you.
So thank you, ma'am, for your work, and appreciate all y'all coming out.
The gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stover, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for your testimony. I, too, am a small business owner with my brothers. This is our 30th year, the ups and downs of small business. And for me, my colleague just asked, what can we do? It is critically important that we take care of our small businesses in this country. They are the engine of our economy. And I say you've never been in a small business until you've had to reach into your back pocket and pay for something unexpected to capital or what have you, like my brothers and I have. It's not fun. It's not easy. So I think the committee members recognize the importance of small business. You had, Mr. Abrams, did you talk about adequate consideration? Would you define that to me? Or maybe Goldstein, you said that, okay. Would you define that?
Yes, absolutely. Adequate consideration is the process by which a trustee determines a fair price in a transaction. So you have a seller and a buyer. They have to agree on price. The buyer is the employees being represented by the trustee. And the problem is that a lot of transactions aren't being done because there's not a clear definition of that process. And so sellers and trustees are too worried to get into that transaction when we'll be tied up in litigation and scrutiny and potentially unwound years after.
Well, I would just, I'm going to publicly ask you to help not only this committee, but me personally out. I would like to connect with you afterwards with my staff assistant because I want to get down to that because that appears to be a major problem and concerning in the ability to make the transaction. The bottom line is the best legislation comes from you folks. And to hear this in the small business, and I've only been here 13 months, but some of the ideas that are coming from our small businessmen and women are unbelievable, and they seem to be so common sense. And so as I read your notes, each of your notes before this, I just want to tell you, number one, thanks for coming up and testifying. And we are here and should be here to make sure that Main Street America, and as I say, Main Street Minnesota succeeds, because the engine of our economy. I really don't have any other questions other than that, but thank you for your attendance and your testimony.
The gentleman yields back, and I am going to recognize myself, and for 5 minutes, if any other member wishes to ask questions, you're welcome. Mr. Condra, we hear you on the issue of access to capital, right? And the problem that we have at this point with SBA's interpretation, but we're going to tackle that issue. My other question is that part of the Main Street Employee Ownership Act directed the SBA to provide outreach and educational materials to participating lenders. It also directed SBA to establish a small business employee ownership and cooperative promotion program. As a lender on the ground, can you give us an update on whether you have seen any of these provisions being implemented?
We've had zero communications on the creation of this program. We have heard indirectly that the SBA did start implementing it in October with the 900 plus SBDCs that they were now required to promote the cooperative model and training and everything. It's a little bit frustrating because the co-op organizations and development centers throughout the country have already done a lot of this work with the materials, the resources. They could be advisors on this. And for us not to know anything about it, I'm afraid the SBDCs are going to start recreating the wheel. Mm-hmm. And also, they'll be duplicating efforts. And the fact is that there's been a lack of communication. So when the administrator comes to see you, you might want to suggest that they communicate a little bit better with the co-op sector.
Sure. And today I'm holding a roundtable with the SBDC's network across the country. So I'll be raising this issue with them.
And this program is one of the biggest accomplishments of the legislation. Mm-hmm. Now we have 900 centers promoting the cooperative model. I mean, it's a huge thing.
It is important that we get it right. And it is important for the Small Business Administration to understand the role that they could play.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Goldstein, I understand your company began acquiring other companies in the media industry. And so my question to you is, how have employees at your company, at the companies that you acquired, reacted to learning that they are now employee owners of the company.
Absolutely. And just a correction, we're acquiring companies that are not in media, so that we,
Yes,
now in manufacturing. So two of my favorite days in my career were getting up in front of Lifeline emergency vehicles and Cimarron trailers and letting them know that, yes, their company has been sold, but now they become employee owners. And something that's very important is that we give each of our employee owners a license to act, and I can pass these out afterwards. It is literally a card that people hold in their pocket. And one example of what this means to employees is that when I was showing the Cimarron leaders during that due diligence period, so nobody knew who they were, around Lifeline emergency vehicles, one of the employees on the floor came up to us, and they knew, of course, that I'm CEO. He pulled his license to act out of his card, and he said, "I'd like to stop you for a moment to talk about an idea." So I stopped the group. We talked about the idea. I said, "I need to continue the tour. Jeff, that's a great idea. Let's get back on that." I didn't realize what an impact this had on Ben and Tony from Cimarron. They said that's the kind of culture that we want to join, where each employee understands the rights and responsibilities of ownership. And that's what I think you've been hearing from my colleagues.
Thank you.
you.
Mr. Gilman, we know that over the next 10 years, more than 2.4 million baby boomers who own private businesses will retire. Can you talk about how ESOPs allow for a smooth transition for owners looking to retire from a business without being forced to sell it or close it down altogether?
Absolutely, Chairwoman. You know, what it allows for is, as Mr. Abrams said, that there's a transition because the owner does not have to leave. There can be a transition period where the individual or individuals that started the company are still there and helping the new owners transition in as they take on that responsibility. But I've also seen what it means for individuals that were employees that are now employee owners and helping that they make the decisions. And when you show them, yes, you are part of this, you are, and then, you know, at year end, when they see what, hey, if the company is profitable, it's good for all of us. It's just a powerful wheel that continues to roll and build momentum.
Mr. Abrams, would you like to comment?
I certainly agree. It's wonderful to see owners come to the realization that the people who built the business with them for all those years actually can take over and become new owners. I think watching transitions from a sole proprietorship or a partnership to a worker co-op is so heartening because it's big change and it makes a big difference, and those doors don't close.
Any other? No. Mr. Gold.
Yes, absolutely. The employee owners, I've heard things said, for example, in Chickasha, Oklahoma, that nobody ever retired from the trailer industry, but now we expect that people will. We have employees in our commercial printing plant that have been employees for 44 years. Employee ownership makes a difference. It's addressing wealth inequality. It's allowing families to fund their retirement. It's very important to this country.
And the impact that it has in the local economies and also the communities. And it's just an unbelievable, empowering feeling to know that they are invested in the success of those companies because they are owners. Well, thank you so much for your powerful testimonies. And we have now heard about many of the benefits employee ownership of business can generate for employee owners, their families, and their local communities. And yet, despite all those benefits, and despite our work in the 115th Congress to address some of the obstacles to employee ownership, it is clear we still have more work to do and progress to achieve. And I heard you loud and clear on the Department of Labor. We'll be dealing with that issue too. If we intend to promote a secure retirement for America's entrepreneurs, we must continue to find ways to ease their path to employee ownership. Time and again, it has proven to be the most effective retirement plan for those small business owners who want to retain the independence of their business while empowering their employees by turning them into employee owners. As I did last Congress with the Main Street Employee Ownership Act, I look forward to working with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to continue minimizing those barriers to employee ownership, help preserve the independence of thousands of small businesses, and save thousands more jobs. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statement and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear. That was really